How many of you can relate to this scenario? Let's fix this by converting the standard shelves to pull-out trays so nothing can get lost at the back of the pantry again. The only obstacle to overcome in these cupboards is the door and the hinges on one side, and as I found out, the thickness of a piece of 16mm melamine is the perfect offset for this. To make the spaces, I first made a score cut on the underside of this melamine to prevent chip out on the edge of the cut. And then raised the blade to cut through the board. I needed 9 of these all up, cut at 60mm high, and that was determined by the space I had between the base of the cupboards and the lower hinge. Each of the spacer pieces were then edge banded to cover up all the bare chipboard edges. In total for this whole conversion, there were 9 spacers, 9 tray bottoms, and 36 tray sides that needed some edge banding. When applying edge banding, one thing I always do after I've glued it down with the iron flat is to tilt the iron slightly to get a really good bond all the way to the edge. Then while it's still hot, run over it with a small block of wood with a rounded edge to really set the adhesive into the chipboard fibres. I don't use any fancy tools to trim the edge banding. All that's needed is a sharp chisel. Always face the chisel down when trimming the edge, and finish off using light passes with fine sandpaper to break the sharp corner. I installed the drawer runners to the spacers now because it's much easier than trying to do it inside the cupboard, which is what I had to do for the runners on the opposite side. I then removed the runner and drilled the mounting holes for the spacer and countersunk those holes for the screw heads. Time to install the runners into the pantry. I set the spacer back from the front of the cupboard by 5mm and screwed it in place. I then fixed the drawer runner in place. Having all those holes pre-drilled made installation a lot easier. The runners on the opposite side of the cupboard were fixed directly to the side panel. It's important not to drive these small screws in too hard because you could strip out the chipboard. I like to finish them off by hand. I just repeated the same process for the other runners. One thing to keep in mind if doing this conversion is that once the trays are installed, their height is no longer adjustable, so choose well. I essentially put the trays in the same position as where the shelves were, because in 15 years, we have never changed a shelf height in this pantry. With the 2 runners in place and the removable sliders installed, I could get an accurate measurement for the width of the tray. I made up this story stick that I could use to cut a lot of the components. I used all of the existing shelves to make 6 of the trays and only needed extra material for the other 3. The existing shelves only needed to be trimmed to width to allow for the drawer runners. The depth of the shelves stayed the same. More edge banding. All the tray bases were edge banded at the front and 2 sides. Those edges were going to be visible because I installed the sides of the trays on top of the bases. The sides could be fixed to the edge of the base, but you'd have to hide all the screws. Doing it this way, I only needed to cover the screw heads on the trays that were above eye level. You'll see how I did that later. I only had white edge banding, so the existing 6 shelves were turned around so the coloured front edge became the back. Using my story stick, I cut the front and rear pieces for the trays which were full width. More edge banding. I needed to fix the fronts of the trays to the side pieces because they were essentially going to be used to pull the trays in and out, and I wanted a hidden fixing, so I used dowels and glue. The Dowmax was the perfect tool for the job, as always. I did the same for the backs of the trays, but they could have been just screwed together because they won't be seen. Those pieces there are the sides of the trays, which I cut and edge banded off camera. Time to assemble the trays. I first drilled pilot holes in the base from the underside, and then countersunk them for the screw heads. I positioned the front rail in place first and drilled pilot holes before screwing them on because these pieces are only 65mm wide and I didn't want them to split. Then it was the same process for the side and back rails with the extra step of gluing in the dowels. I then installed the drawer part of the runner onto the sides of the tray and installed it into the pantry. Perfect fit. To cover the screw heads on the trays that were above eye level, I just used more edge banding. I was surprised to see how well this sticks to the melamine, and it looks so much better than a whole bunch of those white sticky dots. And you can see here how it gives those trays a cleaner quality look. And here's the finished product. The whole pantry looks so much better and neater and organised because having full access to everything makes it easier to keep it that way. There's also much better access to the areas at the top of the cupboard, and it's such a huge improvement not having to literally get on your hands and knees to reach something down here. We hear it said a lot, but for this conversion, I genuinely should have done this years ago.